Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on kicking off the 31st ordinary session of the Arab League that is taking place in Algeria. Now, we were just following the inaugural speeches and the inaugural session of this ordinary session, the 31st, taking place in the Arab League. And joining us here tonight in the studio to shed more light on this very important and timely summit by Dr. Mohamed Abdel Halim, the political analyst. Dr. Abdel Halim, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Abdel Halim, now, first of all, before we start talking about the main topics on the agenda for this summit, now, what is the significance of the timing, the sensitive timing of such a summit, especially taking place as well in Algeria? This is the fourth time the Arab League holds its summit in Algeria. How would you rate this very critical and timely summit?
Right, aptly so, rightly said. It seems to be quite crucial, particularly, this is supposed to be, the 31st session in its inaugural speech that would come actually after the termination of about 3 years, actually, since the last 2019, that was to be held in Tunisia, actually, and then stopped at, at the backdrop of the COVID-19 devastation, and followed by, the sort of the Russian-Ukrainian war, with its own devastating impact on almost the whole world. That sort of summit would seem to be quite very much sensitive, hypersensitive one indeed. And so far as also it coincides with the Israeli elections, actually, and the possibility of reaching to a winning seat, actually, on the part of Netanyahu. That would seem to be quite devastating the whole prospects of peace initiations and peace talks, and the process of the Palestinian cause with its own long examine two-state solution, actually. So, the time is very much crucial on an international arena as much as on the national level. All the Arab countries are very much, as its own title might be suggesting, actually, that is the sense of belonging and coming together, actually. There is a deep awareness on the part of almost all the Arab countries as much as the international community that you'd have to cooperate with each other at the, these particular moments in the history, actually, of the absolute sense of demolition, the devastation and sense of alienation, the lack of, food security, as much as scarcity of water, the international problems, the possibility and the contingency, actually, of a third atomic war, actually, that might be propagated here, there and everywhere. So I think that the whole world would seem to be quite very much witnessing the outcomes of almost this very much international summit that would seem to be quite signifying a large number of details upon which actually the serenity, the peace of mind, the tranquility, and the sense of security, both with respect to food as much as energy, actually would seem to be quite looming large in this particular occasion.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it is seen as also a very big sign of the Arab reunification, Arab solidarity, the Algeria summit. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Algeria hosts the 31st regular session of the Arab League Council Summit on Tuesday, amid hopes that it will bolster Arab reunification and joint Arab action, focus on the Palestinian cause, and give Arab solidarity a fresh start by combining Arab efforts against multi-sided challenges. The agenda of the two-day summit also includes items dealing with all political and economic issues related to Arab countries and peoples, and what amounts to thinking about a better future based on the role of civil society. Algeria stressed full preparedness to host the fourth Arab League summit in its history, which takes place at a critical time at both Arab and global levels. Algerian President Abdel Tebboune voiced hopes the summit would succeed, stressing his country seeks nothing but Arab reunification. Algeria started early and serious preparations to ensure success of the Arab summit. The Algerian president and the foreign minister paid several official visits to Arab capitals with a focus on bringing the views of Arab countries closer. All parties count on the Algiers summit to boost the pan-Arab values of cooperation and solidarity and push toward joint Arab action to ensure a prestigious Arab position that enables Arab nations to exercise its leading role on the global arena and face common challenges imposed by the current international circumstances. Arab leadership sends tweets hope that Algiers summit will unify Arab ranks amid current regional and international circumstances, particularly with regard to the Palestinian cause and the arbitrary and criminal Israeli measures against Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The summit discusses several issues, at top of which is the Palestinian cause, Arab food security and energy, and the repercussions of the war in Ukraine on Arab countries in all fields. Apart from Arab leaders, the summit is attended by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Chairman of Non-Aligned Movement President of the Republic of Azerbaijan and Chairperson of the African Union, President Macky Sall of the Republic of Senegal. The Algiers summit is an opportunity for Arab countries to speak out loudly in a way that reflects their history and past. Arab countries need to unify ranks, goals and programs and adopt reunification initiatives to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Algeria was keen to sponsor a meeting between all Palestinian factions ahead of the summit to sign a reconciliation deal and end their discord was not accidental. The current Arab summit hosted by Algeria bears temporal and spatial significance, and it is expected to succeed for several considerations, rebringing the Palestinian cause to the forefront and differences and support and open up new horizons. Algeria approaches are based on its experience in dealing with many thorny issues through peaceful solutions, as well as its experience in fighting terrorism in 1990s.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing our discussion with Dr. Abdel Halim. Now, during the preparatory meetings ahead of today's opening of the summit, the foreign ministers and all the leaders agreed upon the topics on the agenda of the summit, on top of which is the Palestinian cause, a cause that is very dear and very important to all Arab states. And it's been the topic of discussion for many, many years. Now, Algeria also witnessed a sort of a unification of the different Palestinian divisions and factions, which really signals some sort of hope to reach some sort of an agreement or a resolution as a result of this Arab summit towards the Palestinian cause, towards reaching a two-state solution and a peace agreement. How would you rate such a topic being on top of the agenda, and what do you hope for?
Well, indeed, it occupies a very important and very much distinguished place among the other topics and subject matters that are to be discussed on a large scale. Perhaps, I mean, it seems to be quite very much the point of interest for Egypt for quite some time. Perhaps since Balfour Promise, since more than 40 years ago, the Palestinian cause with its own problematic situation, its own tussling negotiations, I mean, had always been there because it occupies, as I've just said, what you might call a strategic importance. It is a strategic heart for Egypt, actually. And that's why we are always there, we are always discussing, sending high-profile, dignified dignitaries, I would say, to try to solve and to bring the two tussling parties, that is Fatah and Hamas on the one hand. But I think that this summit would seem to be quite very much deeply delving into and deeply, discussing and underlining the importance of the possibility of reaching to a solution, actually, particularly, Joe Biden at one time would suggest some prominent touches, actually, of promising details of re-examining and rediscussing that problematic situation and reaching to a consensus of opinion at the end of the day of that they would have to sit and talk a country and very much quite unlike actually the previous American administration that was to be headed by Donald Trump, when he did declare at one time actually that Jerusalem is supposed to be the prominent and the eminent and the permanent actually capital for Israel, and with his own audacious, I would say, decision of removing the American embassy actually to Jerusalem, that would block actually all the possibilities and contingencies of reaching to a peaceful talk, or reaching to what you might call a two-state solution at the end of the day. Particularly, I was insisting every now and again, that is, Donald Trump on, the deal of the century as a sort of an alternative homeland for the Palestinians actually to be abided in and to be resided there, the sort of the thing that had been demolished by the interference of our own Egyptian presidency actually, as much as it was to be failed in the meantime in the Jordanian kingdom actually. That's why with the departure actually of Donald Trump and the coming or the advent of Joe Biden, we can revive again the possibility of the consummation of almost the whole peaceful situation of reaching to a discussion actually. In more than one respect, Joe Biden did refer to, the present prime minister actually, that they would have to sit and talk and discuss almost all the possibilities and all, the chances actually of putting an end for the struggle, despite the fact that I know that Gaza Strip is on a turmoil actually still, despite the ceasefire and the sort of the stoppage of the gun silencing in there, and the interference of our own presidency actually, of Egyptian presidency, to reach to a consensus of opinion that they would have to halt and stop that sort of struggle and a ceasefire. But the fact remains that the situation in Gaza Strip seems to be quite, not settled to a greater extent, particularly when Ramallah actually is not in good terms actually with leaders in Gaza Strip. But discussing that sort of thing in an international summit, as much as the 31st session of the Arab League is in Algeria today and tomorrow, inshallah, that will be, another contingency, another possibility of sitting and talking and discussing an exam. But let me, draw the attention of our own viewers to one main fundamental fact, that, the previous examinations of the self-same topic that had been reiteratively repeated here, there, and everywhere in more than 30 summits during the course of the last previous 30 years or 40 years, did fail actually. In much the same way that two emergency settings actually, or about 9 settings, did fail in my like respect, and the same manner, because of not reaching to a consensus of opinion among all the Arab countries actually, to not to propagate, not to just take a decision taken actually of inaugurating the sort of solving the problem, that we'd have to agree with each other. That I think that the home should be resettled and re-edited from within, that they should reach to a consensus at the end of the day, that it's far from being a propaganda. It's not just the examination of almost solving the whole situation to outward seeming, whereas deep down they did not reach to a real consensus of opinion of putting an end for the Israeli establishment of the endorsement of the Security Council resolution, actually 242, of the withdrawal actually to the borderlines of 4th of June 1967, and the solving of the problem of the refugees actually, and the water, as much as the problematic situation of the expansion of the settlements on the part of the Israeli side. If we did not reach actually within this summit actually to an overall situation that would reach to a consensus of opinion actually, that realistically and on realistic grounding actually, that there is real agreement among each other on decision taken of actually endorsing all the previous decisions that had been taken on the international arena, as much as the international community. I think it will be the self-same outcomes actually that had been reached too in Tunisia in 2019. So I think that the problematic issue that is to be inaugurated in today's summit is during actually very crucial and very much sensitive social arena, as much as economic dimensions, and in the backdrop actually of the Russian-Ukrainian war, that would make it a bit difficult actually to try to use the self-same colonial outlook and the imperial power that had been there for the Arab countries, particularly the Palestinian cause.
We will talk about the effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in terms of Arab-European relations, but speaking on the Palestinian cause, do you think that with the recent normalization of diplomatic relations of some Arab countries with Israel, do you think it will bear some sort of an effect on reaching some sort of a solution for the Palestinian cause?
Well, to my own point of view, the process of normalization actually should come immediately after the process of reaching to a solution for the two-state solution, actually, concerning the Palestinian cause. Not ahead of it, actually, not in advance, actually, but it should be inevitably, actually, following reaching to a consensus of opinion. And much the same way that's the Abraham Agreement, actually, and somehow or another, it's a good step, actually, towards, solving the problem of normalizing the situation, of getting in touch with and communicating with the Israeli side to sit and talk and discuss and select a sort of decision to be taken. But almost all these decisions should be there and consummated immediately after solving the original problem. We shouldn't begin with what is highly specific without reaching to a consensus among what is to be generalized. So generalization first, then getting into what seems to be quite specific. That is the sort of the problem that will arise actually when you really find in the meantime that there are some countries actually what seem to be quite biased and very much normalizing their own relations with the Israeli side, the sort of the thing that should be propagated and should be endorsed, actually, after solving the original and the authentic cause of the Palestinian territories, actually. And in the meantime, I think that the whole thing could be solved, actually, when we re-edit, actually, the sort of the house from within first, and reaching to and point of agreement among all the Arab factions and all the Palestinian factions that they would forget almost all their own aspirations and their own dreams of glory and power, actually, of reaching to a sense of ascendancy, actually, to the powering status, actually, of achieving the elections first, of reaching to an agreement among the Palestinian people of selecting what sort of leader that they would have to be quite following and taking decisions from. And this will be, in somehow or another, inaugurating and attempting to solve half of the problematic issue. What seems to be quite problematic and looming large, actually, that the notion of peace for peace, or peace in lieu of peace, has been overlooked for quite some time. And instead of insisting on the land in return for peace, there is peace for peace, actually. That's why I think that if there isn't any sort of insistence, actually, on returning to Oslo, to Madrid, to Security Council decision taken, actually, of 242, without these establishments and without these inaugurations of almost these situations, and we wouldn't reach to a consensus of opinion and solving the sort of the thing that had been quite there for quite a long period of time. What seems to be quite admiring and amazing in the meantime is the fact that the insistence of the Egyptian side that seems to be quite there since about 40 or 50 years, that it never changes. We never change by time. Our own decision taken towards solving the heart of the problematic situation of the Palestinian cause, no matter how the American administration would seem to be quite changing every now and again. We have got some fixed line. We have got a sort of fixity, actually, of internally as well as externally in our own diplomatic relations with almost all our own negotiations in Arab countries as much as the foreign world, insisting on the self-same topic, on the self-same cause, that is the liberation of the Palestinian territories, actually, of the establishment of two-state solution, of the Eastern Jerusalem for the Arabs, and the other side by the Israeli, superimposition. And had it not been actually for the American administration during the course of Donald Trump, it would have been solved, actually, and we could have been reached to a consensus among each other and among the Israeli side. But the situation is almost there, quite glaring, quite glorious, quite straightforward and direct on the part of our own Egyptian presidency, the propagation of the liberation of the Palestinian territories. That would come first, and almost what seems to be quite coming as a plan B or third step is other negotiations such as the Abraham agreements, Abrahami agreement, and the normalization in any conceivable respect.
Dr. Abdel Halim, now another topic is the obviously the Ukraine-Russian conflict has affected the whole world economically in terms of energy and food supplies and grains and such. Now, how, as a result of this Arab summit, how do we actually work on a unified solution to deal with such a food and energy crisis that is hitting the whole world and the inflation that is hitting the whole world? How can the Arabs during such a summit find a way to dig themselves out of such a global phenomenon?
Well, we can really take the positive side of it, actually, that we are in Africa. We are situated at the heart of Africa. We are beseeching a large number of rivers, as much as, Mediterranean Sea, actually exposing extension of border lines extended here, there, and everywhere. The situation and the location, actually, of the Egyptian territory, actually, would occupy prominent and pride of place among all other countries, actually. That's why I think that the element of success and the key entrance would come out and would stem out from Egypt as playing a very important and very much vital role in being the West's grain basket, actually, that would solve almost the energy, the scarcity of food, and the problematic situation of the scarcity of water in the meantime. And we have had a very successful step during the last months when we did attend, actually, the Ticket 8, the Tunisian summit held by Mr. President Qais Said, who did invite the Egyptian side, actually, to participate, knowing the importance and the strategic, vital existence at the heart of Africa as being able, actually, to solve the whole issues. Egypt had always been there inaugurating and solving and editing almost all the possibilities and participating, actually, of making solutions towards the scarcity of food and grains and wheat and that sort of thing. I think also that the renewal energy and the renewal of the green energy will be in somehow another stemming out from Egypt. And Mr. President Abdel Sisi, in more than one respect, did draw the attention of the Western world that in an attempt actually to achieve stability and security and saving almost all these headaches, not only for the Mediterranean countries, but actually for the Western world, would stem out from alleviating the pains as much as the debts from the African countries. That was an invitation in his own Excellency's part during the course of 4 or 5 months, actually.
Yes.
I mean, asking the Western world and the American administration that this is the only possible way through the aid of which we can really, save not only our own problem, but actually yours in the meantime, namely the Western as much as the American.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Abdel Halim mentioned, the presidency and Foreign Minister Shukri as well have really voiced a lot of optimism tied to the Algeria summit. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry expressed optimism about the ongoing Arab Summit in Algeria, which started its activities on Tuesday. The minister, who took part in meetings of the Arab League Council ahead of the summit, lauded close cooperation and ongoing coordination between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Minister Shoukry said Egypt is set to launch an initiative to counter climate change negative impacts at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, to be hosted by Sharm el-Sheikh in November. The top diplomat said trillions of dollars are needed to cut bad emissions, calling for setting any political differences aside at the conference. The ministerial meetings came as part of preparations for holding the 31st Arab League Summit, where Arab ministers reviewed the summit agenda and decisions to be introduced during the summit activities. It is the first summit for the Arab League after a 2-year hiatus, which makes the event very important for helping Arab countries face the grave challenges facing them due to the current critical international and regional conditions. The Palestinian cause tops the agenda of the summit, along with other files including the Arab-European and Arab-African relations and economy and investments, as well as trade exchange in the Arab region. Algerian Prime Minister said that the Arab meeting would be an occasion to reaffirm support for Palestinian cause as essential Arab cause by emphasizing the common Arab position represented in the peace initiative, which is the framework that guarantees protection of the legitimate rights of Palestinian people. Arab League Secretary General Abdel said food security and Palestinian cause will be on the top agenda of the summit, which he stressed should be a milestone for a brand new joint Arab action. Abdel called for concrete measures and strategies to be adopted to achieve and enhance food security in the Arab region. The summit is tackling some decisions which should reflect the Arab will in settling disputes, restoring peace and bringing about stability and development for the Arab nations. For Algeria is the summit considered the most important in the history of Arab summits, especially after the success of Algeria's efforts to gather Palestinian factions to sign reconciliation agreement on October 13th. This is the fourth Arab summit hosted by Algeria since its accession to the Arab League in 1962.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Abdel Halim. Now, sir, during the Arab Summit, they spoke about not interfering the foreign countries interfering in the internal affairs and the sovereignty of Arab countries. They discussed Yemen, they'll discuss Syria and Libya as well. And you've pointed out to me that Libya as well is of great importance for the oil resources and the wealth that it has. What can be done by the Arab Summit in their meeting in Algeria to come up with some sort of a solution and a unified front to really protect Arab countries, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and all these North African countries? How can they protect and work on a unified front for Libya?
Part and parcel of almost each single individual sort of Arab summit is to give rise actually to three dimensions, major ones indeed. The first is achievement of security and safety for almost all the Arab countries without the least interference on the indigenous internal affairs of its own citizens or adjacent countries. That is the first dimension. The second is the sort of the ability in a unified sense actually to stop any sort of external attack on almost any sort of individual Arab country, which is supposed to be the second tenet and the second dimension actually. And the third, which is the Palestinian cause. All these three dimensions that we have had an idea about right now, all of these three dimensions are to be iteratively repeated almost in each single individual sort of summit actually. Perhaps the Libyan case is very much prominent and very much, giving rise to inevitable questions every now and again. Why so the Libyan case is still unsolved, unresolved actually, undetermined until today, despite the fact that you have had a large number of, extensive scenarios and lengthy details of summits. We have had Berlin, we have had Palermo, we have had Geneva 1 and Geneva 2, we've had Al-Sukhayrat, as much as the Kuwait agreement, Cairo 1 as well, without the least reach actually to one essential point of view that would put an end for the struggle and tussle in that. But I think that the whole situation would be clarified if we get to know that the fact that the hidden agenda on the part of the European countries and the American administration, that is Italy, France, Turkey as well, that they are keeping an eye and concentrating the zoom of the camera actually on the Libyan fortunes and the oil, and they would benefit actually from the mutual devastation, from the devastation and the inability to reach to a consensus of opinion among the Libyan tribes, their own inability to select a sort of leader actually to be dealt with, and their own indecision of reaching to a real government. We've got a couple of governments, and one legal and the other is commonly regarded as illegal. Two types of arms actually, one to be accepted in the international arena, as much as the international community, actually, and the other is never to be accepted in any conceivable respect. All these tussling groups and militias and all these devastating, aspects of mutilating the Libyan territory from within, with the view of reaching to the oil and the fortune, they would expand the sort of the struggle every now and again. All these colonial outlooks and imperial divisions, actually, on the part of almost all these parties, are very much utilizing the situation of being divided every now and again. And as such, I think that the sort of reaching to a solution would be delayed to a greater extent. The problem in Libya is the fact that whenever you reach to Tripoli, you find yourself quite unable to get in. Because once you get in, the whole thing will be solved. The sort of the thing that the Western world wouldn't like to accept because of the distortion, because of the distribution of the wealth, of the oil and the fortunes, without the sort of any existence of any individual leader to be negotiated with. So they are benefiting from the whole situation. And we are insisting every now and again on defending our own borderlines in Libya, of safeguarding our own land, because, I mean, we don't have just 100 to or 1,200 kilometers. We have got about 2,400 kilometers because we don't have any sort of leader to negotiate with. That's why the sort of the trouble is doubled, actually, and the safeguarding is, doubled in like manner. And as such, you find that all the previous attempts of reaching to a solution in Libya would come to a fiasco at the end of the day. Yes. Had it not been actually that they would reach to an inevitable decision taken from within, that all the tribes should sit and talk and expose their own opinions and select a parliament, a leader to be dealt with actually on a large scale.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of important issues will be filling the agenda of the 31st Ordinary Session and Summit of the Arab League taking place in Algeria today and tomorrow as well. Dr. Abdel mentioned the Palestinian cause, the Arab-European relations in terms of the food and energy crises taking over, and also a lot of regional issues, most notably the Libyan file. A lot more to discuss and a lot more to be followed up here on Nile TV International. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. Before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohamed Halim, the political analyst. Dr. Halim, always a pleasure having you with us.
My pleasure, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.